clickbait later, whatever. Just make a mental note, but I want to fix the Aries video. I also can't get any of these timers to work better. Like, all this poor technology is going to hate me by the end of it. Video 0202. Taurus. Hi, Taurus. Taurus is the mountain energy. I like Tauruses, honestly. Usually visualized as a strong mountain, very tall, very proud, very, very large arms. They're good at supporting people, taking care of people. If you think about a mountainside, it supports many different life forms and many different kinds of animals, many different kinds of plants. And in a lot of ways, Taurus looks to do that same kind of nurturing. You want to be the area and the space that can provide as much as possible for those around you. And this is where you get a lot of Tauruses that like to give and pour out and lay out all their energies and all their forms. But the thing is, the mountain kind of has some expectations about how that's going to work. I always think about the gorilla song, Fire Coming from the Monkey's Head, or Monkey Mountain. I can't remember specifically the name, but it discusses how people go into a sacred mountain and start drilling deeply and taking all the good souls and good energies and good gems out of this mountain. Eventually the mountain just gets all pissed off and winds up obliterating everybody as a giant roar ripping through and killing everybody all at once. Love it. Why? Because Taurus operates much the same way. If you take from them what they are offering you, great. If, however, they feel like you are taking advantage or using their energy or taking too much from them, it does become dangerous for you. Much like the moving mountain of our own North American history, or a volcano essentially, cross a Taurus, they're going to obliterate you. It's just the way that it is. So for Taurus, it's a matter of making sure you're recognizing sometimes situations are of your own design. You can't take that basically upon yourself. And sometimes it's recognizing that you've got a little bit of that buildup of pressure and emotion inside of you, and you got to let that come out healthily. Much like a volcano growing out of the water, same way Hawaii did. Taurus can learn very quickly from their emotions, from their anger, from their pain. They just have to be given the opportunity to do so. And those working around a Taurus need to be careful that they're not adding too much pressure or causing too much harm to the Taurus during the process. I also find it very important with most Tauruses to recognize you are the fixed earth sign. Now, fixed being very precise. You are what you are, and adjusting and changing and modifying that, I wouldn't recommend it. It's more likely that you're going to have to find people that will adapt and work around you than people that you will adapt and work around, especially as you go through the different pieces of the planets and how they each affect your natal chart. This does make you very slow to change, very stubborn in change, very in your own style, in your own stead, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Just recognize that if you use those aggressively, it's going to harm you. So, Sun sign Taurus, that bold attitude, that strong personality, that you are what you are and you're going to be what you are, and it's just going to ride its way through no matter what. Moon in Taurus, incredibly deep emotions. Every moon in Taurus I've met has always gotten stuck thinking their emotions through so much and so over, and I don't understand it. They just get stuck in this cycle of it. And the only way I can think of it is because the mountain is so massive, the mountain is so powerful. When you start trying to run emotions through it like water, it just takes forever for those emotions to filter through. So most of the moon and Tauruses that I've met are very slow in selecting their relationships and acting on their relationships. They're not looking to rush into things really in any way, shape, or form. If something doesn't quite work out, they might watch it for a long period of time, but once they've kind of resolved themselves that it's either stupid or it's not going to work, they're going to follow through with that fairly quickly. Very, very deep emotions, very deep-rooted emotions with that one. And biggest thing there is to recognize is that a massive and enormous capacity of emotions can sometimes feel overwhelming, especially when it moves so slowly. It's not like an ocean, and it's not like a windstorm or hurricane. It's moving so slowly and so within itself that sometimes it may feel like it's not moving at all. But the tectonic plates are moving all the time. We just don't recognize it because from our perspective, it's so big, it's hard for us to see that movement in motion. Feel it. Find it in your feeling, and that's what's going to do you the most health. Taurus and Mercury, rational, logical, very, very methodical. Very methodical. having a plan would be more crucial than anything, and the more structured and the more organized that plan can be, the better off and the happier off you're going to be as an individual. You may find that certain concepts just feel difficult to master or handle. Things that are overly poetic or flamboyant may be difficult to follow as well. Tauruses already prefer things fairly straight and cut and dry, but with a Taurus and Mercury, now we're seeing it as a necessity. It has to be in the communication, the method of the Taurus themselves. Trying to deliver it and trying to offer it in any other ways just doesn't help, ultimately. Very, very rational thinker with that one. Would be very logical, would be very rational, would be very methodical in their thought process. Taurus in Venus. Now, Taurus in love is weird because a lot of Tauruses, all the fixed signs, honestly, they love who they love and they don't ever argue with it. They don't, it is a feeling that they are dealing with and that they're working with, and they're fixated on it. Hence why I think they're called fixed signs, but that could just be me making fun of them. A Taurus in Venus is going to be so particular about how relationships and structure is going to be, and any deviation from that, I think they might be willing to a point for certain partners, but if they start to feel like they're being dragged along or pushed in ways that they're not comfortable, I could see a very, very hefty rebellion coming quite quickly. And this would be one area where that bottling of emotions would be very, very dangerous, especially. I always think back to Krakatoa, capped off volcano builds up so much pressure that the walls explode out in every which direction. Sounds phenomenal. Sounds really, really, honestly, prehistoric in its dynamic. So a Taurus doing exactly that, putting so much pressure on themselves and trapping so much within themselves that eventually they just erupt. That would be exactly what I would be worried about a Taurus and Venus doing. Because Venus requires that motion and that movement of emotion, and Tauruses don't flow on things very quickly. They like things at a pace that is under their control and under their guise. So making sure that you're very carefully looking at your emotions and allowing them not to get stuck, not to get stagnant, not to get held back in any way, shape, or form. Recognizing that you're going to need a lot of attentiveness, careful attention, but you're not going to want to accept this because you feel like you have to be the nurturer, you have to be the giver. A risk of bending over backwards and doing too much for people because you feel that's the duty of the self. And just be mindful of that. You've got a great capacity for love, huge emotions with the Taurus and Venus. So just make sure that you're being respectful of those emotions where they're kind of guiding you. Going off on tangents here, it's going to take forever. Mars in Taurus. Mars in Taurus. The nice thing is Mars energy is usually double enhancing on fire. So when it gets applied to Taurus, it doesn't exactly enhance so well. But it doesn't. This is where volcano is, again, a very, very, very apt word. But whereas Venus and Taurus, I worry about a capped volcano. Venus and Mars, no, not an issue. It's not going to be. This volcano blows what it wants to blow. It's consistent, it's rational, it's powerful. You know exactly how it's going to function. This is more in that dynamic of Hawaii than anything else, as it's rising up and showing its presence and showing its power. This combination lends to a capacity to really be out there, front-cutting, very strong business edge, very strong tactical mind, very strong logical processing skills to be critically thinking through solutions and effectively applying them with leadership and ruthlessness. I hate using the word ruthless because it usually comes with the connotation of harshness, but ruthless doesn't have to mean harshness. It just means that you are so effective with the actions of what you're doing that challenge is not really an issue. You're challenging me and I'm going to twist your wrist and knock you down onto the ground. I can ruthlessly effect this action upon you because I am skilled in it, I am knowledgeable in it, and I am tactically sounded. My tactics are sound in how I'm going to deliver this. Taurus and Mars would be fun, more than anything. The only thing I would be really worried about is a sense of ego. Becoming too overbearing and expecting that you have too much that you can lay down and demand and push onto others. Now, Taurus in Jupiter, fair combo. A a lot with that would definitely center on your capacity to connect with people. The combination I could see especially coming up with a lot in the healing profession or anything else that's sort of a civic service. The plus side to a Taurus and Jupiter, you're looking at a very, very large capacity and large capability to really affect people, affect crowds, affect groups, affect a large swath. The downside to a Taurus and Jupiter, it's going to be a very, very draining combination. It's going to be a very demanding combination. Jupiter is wizard and guide and teacher, but it's going to approach you and say to you, we need to set you up and appropriate you as a proper mentor and as a proper teacher yourself. And a teacher to teacher dynamic. Anyone that's been a TA knows what I'm trying to get at here. But you can see your teacher at the back of the classroom and they're watching you trying to do what you're doing, and the whole class is watching both because they know you don't know what you're talking about, but you're pretending that you do. And they know this one knows what they're talking about and they're letting you talk about it. So does that mean you actually know what you're talking about it? And there's an overthinking confidence trap that exists there. And if you're Taurus and Jupiter, you got to be really careful that you're not getting yourself stuck into it. Yes, you're doing good works. Be logical about it. Don't feel about it, but be trusting in your own vision and observation of the results that you are doing. Taurus and Saturn, probably lessons on fortitude and consistency, a karmic debt, especially centering on not holding position, not holding standard, not holding promise, maybe present within that dynamic. The plus side to it, I find Saturn a little bit more respectful towards Taurus placements. The lessons, while they may be very deep or very while they might have a bit of an oof effect or impact, they're not always held vindictively with Saturn Taurus. Expect, though, that if there is something that you are consistently being called to, whether that be civic care or service, it's going to be a consistent thing throughout your entire life. If you have issues when it comes to maintaining management of debts or businesses or personal finances, Saturn and Taurus could expand that and compound that and make it so that that really is a lesson that you have to deal with from beginning to end. And the biggest thing with Saturn and Taurus, I think once you find your habits and once you find your flow, be consistent with it. I think the gift in the long run from that combination is meant to be consistency and methodic patterns and behaviors, but it's hard to tell. Realistically, you could find that everything's a challenge when it comes to looking at the structure of things, and it just becomes incumbent upon you to make sure that you're listening and being observant. Neptune, Uranus, Uranus, Neptune. At some point, I'm going to memorize which order they go in. Uranus, Neptune. So, Uranus. Taurus, Uranus is going to be a bit of a tough one because, like, you're dealing with a lot of energies when it comes to chaos and transformation and metamorphosis, and Taurus doesn't necessarily work well with that. Like Taurus is mountain, Taurus is strong form, strong firmity, and Uranus challenges things, it grows things, it enhances things, and usually more, it's more in that expression and development of self in relation to what is coming up around us outside of ourselves. Like, this is a higher function of Mercury, if I remember correctly. I'm just going to double check myself real quick on that. Yes, this is the higher vibration of Mercury. So this is getting more into cosmic thought and cosmic pattern. What is the identity and what is the thought process, not just of ourselves, but of our universe. And as that's, the combination is a curse because you're a mortal being trying to expand yourself and say, my 100 years matter. And then this fucking energy comes down and slaps you around and says, no, you are an insignificant speck in a long run of insignificant specks, and you have to acknowledge that. And so there'd be a lot of self-struggle, feeling very much like you're working against the grain, trying to expand yourself, but feeling like the outside world is working against you at all times. Feeling very put upon, that you have to fight or struggle against every obstacle and everything constantly, and that could sometimes come into being creating a certain amount of tension or frustration or anger or just frustrations that generally never go away. Don't rail against the universe so heavily. Taurus, yes, you're supposed to be stubborn, you're supposed to be a strong-ass bull, but it's one thing to be a bull when someone's tied your nuts up against your chest and is telling you to fight this guy with a sword. It's another thing to be a bull that's just charging anything and everything that you see just because you feel like it. And this is one area where being stubborn and charging and fighting just for the sake of it isn't going to help you, nor is getting into a posture where they're going to tie you up and hurt you. It has to be instead more of a don't engage in defense of self, engage in curiosity of the bigger picture. Taurus, Neptune, and Neptune, Pluto are both on really, really, really long cycles. And so the chances of us actually seeing them coming up again in our lifetimes, like Taurus and Pisces is going through until 2025. So it's going to be a while before Taurus, Neptune is really a big issue again. Being Neptune, though, that deeper emotion and that emotion of community and of the world and everything universal, like the outer ones are sort of that collective body, the inner ones are the personal body. So here we're dealing sort of with that stubbornness of community, of collective, and Taurus could either work really, really well or really, really contrary depending on the individual themselves. See, Neptune challenges a lot of our own personal thoughts and allows us to kind of see the emotions not just of us as of an individual, but us as a culture, us as a community, and us as a collective. If Taurus is meant to be that big house, that big energy, that big format, that big dynamic, you're either going to fit in or you're not, and therein lies the first issue. If you feel like you're part of a society that doesn't connect with you and doesn't resonate with you, a Taurus-Neptune combination is going to create sort of this conflict dynamic where your thoughts and the perspective of the world around you don't match. And I think we see that a lot more than we want to acknowledge. The truth of it is, some people's opinions and beliefs have grown in such a different way, in such a different dynamic, and they've become entrenched within this. And much like a mountain that has just become an obstacle to everything else going on around it, it's stopping the winds from blowing through, the snow can't get over top, the rain can't get over top, it's creating a desert on the other side because it's held back all that moisture. The collective is going to look at that as a frustration. And therein, that stubbornness and using that energy incorrectly brings harm not just to yourself, but to the culture as well. So, placed with a Neptune Taurus, I would say be careful in how you deal with other people and recognize that you have to look past just what you believe is right and needs and look and hear what other people might be hearing and needing and right and needs as well too. An openness must be developed. Otherwise, the combination may cause you to withdraw so much into yourself that you disconnect from the larger picture and from the larger world. Now, the last person to be born in Taurus and Neptune would have been back in the 1800s. So, it's not like we really have to deal with this quite so much. But in some of my theorem videos where I discuss, for example, Pluto dredging up certain cultural norms, I do think that Neptune dredges up certain family norms. And as such, those of us that were raised by those that were born in the late 1800s or early 1900s, we remember the mindsets, we remember the cultures, we remember the way they thought. And it's a very different mindset, a different style than now. If you were a farm kid, you were born to work the farm. And that's very, very Neptune and Taurus to me, where the purpose of your existence for the society is what you provide to the society in a material way. Not to say that Taurus is material function, but Earth is money, finance, structure, all those little bits. Taurus and Pluto, another one that's going to take butt hell forever, and so makes this all just an absolute nightmare. Transformation and death affecting the fixed earth sign. Well, let's go with a prediction then. Dredging up and creating a situation where we all have to look at ourselves and how we independently wish to be, and challenging whether our independence is actually ego or genuine, whether we deserve to be independent. And I think when we do face Pluto in Taurus again, we as a culture are going to face a trial where we're questioning whether submission to citizenship or hierarchies, where we have to be docile and subservient to something at the very top with no real influence or control over ourselves, we may find this no longer fitting and serving to ourselves as individuals, thus bringing out more chaos and more change. Why this prediction? Well, one, we're in Pluto and Capricorn right now, if I'm not mistaken. I really should double check that. Yeah, Pluto and Capricorn until 2022. So I would expect all the Earth Plutos to really be about dredging up the structures of things. With Capricorn being the structure of governments and systems, that cardinal energy, I would expect the very foundations, family being a big one, community being a big one, municipalities. I think a lot of that's going to get looked at, challenged, and dredged through when we go through Pluto and Taurus. Thus, the people that are going to be born during that time are going to be raised during a period where there's a great awareness on how nationalism affects us as individuals and how that effect branches out to influence other people's opinions and relations to us. After all, a very, very extreme nationalist country may not see as much trade with others as a country that is more open to cultures and possibilities. Anyway, there's your Tauruses. Have fun.